The deeper I got into shamanism, actually that a lot of dark things started happening, a lot of concerning things in my life, where I would feel these very dark presences in my room. So I would go to ceremonies with shamans, but I would feel that when I would take this with them, that I would in a way collect some of their baggage and bring that with me back home. My name is Joao, I'm 26 years old, and I live in the south of Portugal. Currently, I'm serving in a way that I believe is bringing the highest of my vision and ideals to this earth. So I'm working in different areas, doing things that I love with a group of people that I love. And I've been on a deep journey for these past years, and I want to share this with you today.
Amazing. Well, I know a lot about your story, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say today. So where does your story begin?
So if I go back long enough, I would say as a little child already, I would have these glimpses in my inner being of this extra sensorial or this reality beyond this earth. And I'd start experiencing at night these fears of death as a young kid, these very profound fears of death, where I would lay in my bed and I would ponder on the temporality of life and how horrible that seemed to me. It just seemed horrible that I'd have to face this huge vastness called death one day. And since a kid, that got me pondering. So this state of pondering just kind of dragged on into my teenage years, and I became quite a deep thinker. I read a lot of books, I got into a lot of philosophy, and through this, I also started opening up a spiritual quest, because I could see around me that my life at the time, going to high school and just working for a job, and then maybe one day having a nice car and, I don't know, a nice house. Although these were nice things and good things, I didn't feel that they were the highest fulfillment of my life. So I started to question a lot. And this questioning led me to avenues of study, but also into a lifestyle of taking all kinds of different substances. So quite young, I started taking a lot of marijuana, smoking a lot of weed in school with my friends. And for me, it wasn't just about getting wasted or just getting high for the night and then that's it. I would usually have very profound experiences that would shake my reality. And after these nights where I would spend with my friends smoking or doing this or that, I would begin pondering even more this meaning of life, this meaning of who I am. I'd become very self-reflective, not only in the thoughts, but about the nature of my being. What is this human that I am? What is this existence? Why does something exist? I used to think. And this just led me on a deeper journey where I just started getting into just harder substances. So I went from just regular smoking, I went into psychedelic substances. And this is what really opened up my quest of spiritual seeking, where I started entering into these very profound inner states when I would take these strong substances, such as LSD, mushrooms, and as I progressed, I went into DMT, which is a very, very strong compound that for about 15 minutes completely breaks all of reality and you enter into this hyperdimensional state. So you see a reality even realer than the current one we're able to see with our eyes. It's that real, it's that intense. And so this dimension started really tugging on me. I started being really hungry to go into this place that is beyond this earth, because it's also in this place where I started experiencing certain answers and certain fulfillments to the quest of my being, let's say, this spiritual quest. Along all of that inner seeking, I also had an outer seeking. I went through a period of shyness, which was caused from a lot of problems that I had as youth. Some things happened in my life that led me to experience a lot of shyness and social awkwardness. And so when I started finding these drugs, some of them were more party drugs, such as ecstasy and MDMA, I would take these at the nightclubs, and all of a sudden, for 5 hours, I would enter into this explosion state where I could speak to anyone, where I had this superhuman strength to dance all night and to hug everyone and be as honest and vulnerable to everyone as possible. So it would be very easy to tell all the deepest secrets that I had. And this caused fulfillment because in my daily life, these are things that I hid. I would put on masks to go about school. But in these nights, I could finally take off all these masks and fully be vulnerable. And so, of course, these states and these experiences with my friends and these nights out, they really attracted me because I saw freedom in it. I saw freedom from what I perceived at the time to be my boxes, right? I would be able to break those boxes and be completely free, even if it was just for 5 or 6 hours. And so this night lifestyle, where I would go to drum and bass parties and techno parties, started merging with that inner seeking that I was talking about before. So that outward seeking started also combining with that spiritual inner quest for the meaning of existence, the meaning of the why I'm here. And this is when I started having, in a way, what I could call transcendental experiences while I was dancing. So no longer was I just moving this physical body in a way that's pleasurable. No, now I was really entering into a deep inner state of expansion where I would enter these places and these realms and these experiences of being that were way beyond my ordinary reality. And I would begin receiving a lot of information, a lot of visions, and a lot of sometimes also even practical wisdom of how to improve my life. So in these nights, then I started it started going from just one night to weeks long. This is when I got into trance festivals. So I moved to Portugal, and here is kind of a spiritual pilgrimage hub for all kinds of festivals, especially psytrance festivals. And when I met the psytrance community, I saw people around me that were so free. I saw people that it seemed to be liberated from worries. They had no jobs. They could just dance for months on end and enjoy life, sharing together. And this lifestyle was really beautiful for me, coming out of a Northern European country of regulations and control and strictness. So when I saw this lifestyle, it really, really attracted me. And I saw something in these people that I also wanted for myself. So I started going to more and more of these trance festivals. And I would take these psychedelic substances. I'd take a lot of LSD. I would take a lot of mushrooms on the dance floor. And I started maturing in a way in this spiritual quest. No longer was it just getting blasted for that night, but no, I started consciously focusing the use of those substances for days on end, because I would intentionally want to enter a trance state. And to fully enter a trance state, one has to really go for a few days into a selfless state of dancing and contemplation, inner contemplation. So this was my path for 3 years, where I went to a lot of festivals. I took very, very strong and high amounts of psychedelics, and I used to just dance for hours, multiple days on end. And this was, for about 3 good years. And through this, I started getting an even deeper search for the truth. Because, of course, I used to have these transcendental and explosive experiences on the dance floor. But I would encounter a part of myself where I felt I couldn't fully reach in that dance floor. Because as beautiful and as, let's say, expansive as it was, I didn't feel it was the right environment because it had a lot of other substances in the mix. People would smoke, tobacco, alcohol. So at the time I was very sensitive to energy, and I could feel the unconscious energy in people. So I didn't feel fully open to expand into that state. So this is when I started getting really interested in actually studying shamanism, which is the use of these very strong psychedelic substances, but in a more controlled state, or a more controlled environment, where you're able to go very deep into yourself with people that are trusted around you. So I got very interested in ayahuasca, which is a brew from the Amazon, where they mix two very, very potent plants that, when they're combined together, they blast the consciousness and they flood the human neurological system with a very strong compound that sends you into this DMT experience I told you a while ago. Not 15 minutes, but 6 hours or 5 hours. So for 5 hours, one is traveling in very, very intense places of spiritual vision and rapture and revelation. So this really interested me, because when I was taken to these places, I also felt a really deep inner healing. And I felt I was healing a generational line of problems. Not only my own generation, but I felt I was connected to the whole lineage of humanity, and that my own healing was connected to the healing of the whole humanity. Now, looking back, I see there's really big glimpses of light in that, because it is true that our own healing affects the collective healing. So when I look at all my journey, I really see a thread where I was just looking for authentic, personal, and collective healing. And that was really what fueled my path for most of the walk. But there did reach a point where I felt this wasn't being fully activated, this healing that I was looking for, this selfless and benevolent healing. Because the deeper I got into shamanism, actually, that a lot of dark things started happening, a lot of concerning things in my life, where I would feel these very dark presences in my room. So I would go to ceremonies with shamans. A shaman is a leader of, for example, an ayahuasca ceremony. Normally, it's a man who has decades of experience with these plants and is able to, let's say, facilitate and conduct the room, almost like an orchestra leader. And he's able to do that spiritually for people who are going into this ayahuasca experience. But I would feel that when I would take this with them, that I would, in a way, collect some of their baggage and bring that with me back home. And this is what started concerning me, because the things that I was bringing back home, they weren't benevolent. They weren't this healing life energy that I was looking for. They were actually quite dark. I felt a lot of fear, for example. There were moments when I would go into my room and I would be very, very afraid of going to bed, because I know that in the sleep I would get attacked by these entities. I would have these entities that would attack my body, my physical body, my spiritual body, many times like a spiritual molestation and a violation. And I could feel this sexual dirtiness to it. So these were like these negative sexual demons. They would attack me because they would siphon off my life force, my life energy. And as they were siphoning this off of me, I could just feel their hatred towards me and their just lack of disdain for the integrity of my humanity. So I felt that this was not respected at all. And this is when I started getting really concerned, because although I had walked this path already for a few years, I had activated into really powerful states of light expansion flowing from my being. I knew shamanic songs to be able to counteract these dark forces. I knew specific plants to use that would cause the atmosphere to change. But the more I did this in my room specifically, that the less I could get rid of it. It actually got worse. So the more, for example, I burned the Palo Santo, the more I burned sage in my room, and the more I did these chants and even had ceremonies in my room to try and clear the atmosphere. The more I did this, the worse it got. And this is when I started getting really concerning, because I saw that I was really powerless at that time. And I started saying, actually, there's nothing I can do to get rid of this. This is so intense. And so this went on for a few months. And for this period of a few months, it was about 6 months, I started just pondering, is there maybe something more that I'm missing? And at a certain point, it wasn't just a pondering. I actually knew there was something that I was missing, but I didn't know what at the time. I couldn't fully put my finger on it. So I continued studying shamanism. I continued getting quite deep into Buddhism and Eastern forms of mysticism. And the more I practiced these, it seemed that the worse I got. The more that these negative beings started getting access, now not only into my room, but actually into my body. I would go to these ceremonies and I would feel these entities trying to enter into my body to take me as a host. So just to give you some reference, although I was seeking for inner healing and light expansion, when you study a lot of Amazonian shamanism, actually the whole purpose and the driving force that drives healing is that one has to partner with spirits. And there is a transaction that happens on the spiritual plane and even on the physical plane. So one usually gives their life force and even their body to be used as a host, to be a channel for healing to the other person. But what this means is that one has to give up the control of regions of their own self to these beings. And especially for me, I had no idea who these beings were. They would just appear randomly, and it's all kinds of different beings. But I had no way to verify who they actually were. Were they trustworthy? Were they actually looking out for my highest well-being? I didn't know this. So when they would approach me to try and take hold of my body, it's like a spiritual fight activated. Like I didn't want to let them in. So like almost this inner warrior started coming out to fight. But it wasn't enough, because actually in one ceremony, those things got so powerful that they actually, I'm not sure if they came in at the time. I'm quite fuzzy still on that, but they had a hold over me that night. And even the next day, I was so dizzy, so that actually I was walking and then I walked through a doorway and I fainted. I fainted for a few seconds. And then the ceremony man picked me back up and said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" But my physical body fainted after an ayahuasca ceremony. And this is when I started seeing that this is not the light and the life expansion and the healing that I'm looking for. There's actually darkness and muddiness mixed with all of this. And surely enough, these rose-tinted glasses that I had about this festival culture and this lifestyle also started being broken, because I also started seeing a lot of suffering in the people who were my friends. I saw friends have psychotic breaks. I saw friends going to mental hospitals. I saw friends really losing touch with reality. I saw people just acting in quite nasty ways. And in the beginning, I observed this around me. But at another point, it actually started coming against me through people and through spiritual beings in the festivals that I continued going to parallel to the ceremonies. This was a really intense period of my life. It's what you would call a dark night of the soul. I had nowhere to hang on to. At the time, I had no real reference point to the highest benevolence or the highest loving being that could exist. So I had nowhere to hold on to. It was just me and myself and my inner spiritual generator of light that had to fight this tremendous orchestra of dark forces coming against me. So it was really intense. I felt like a grain of sand that had to fend for itself against this huge pack of wolves. It's around this 6-month period that I started getting an external touch, but this time it was a very, 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 very benevolent force. I would be working at a friend's farm, for example, and all of a sudden I would feel this very gentle blanket upon me and tears would just roll down my eyes. And I just felt this beautiful healing come into my being. And bear in mind, this was not when I was in any substance at all. So I was just working on the farm. I was like, what is this? This is so beautiful. This went on for a while. I started getting these touches of this blanket upon me many times. But there was also moments where this blanket would also trigger my conscience to be radically raw and self-honest, because the paradigm that I was operating when I was going into all these ceremonies, it didn't fully allow me to see the fullness of my own darkness. Therefore, I couldn't fully take responsibility for all of my being. But when this benevolent blanket came upon me, I started having that. I saw all the evil things that I'd done, and I can say evil because they're really some bad things I'd done in my past. And I was really avoiding. I was like putting them under the blanket and covering it. I don't want to look at that. The blanket's beautiful, so I'll just enjoy the blanket. But underneath, there were these years of residue that was accumulating. When this benevolent, beautiful being came, that blanket had to be opened. And all of a sudden, I had to start cleaning my room. And this was a really intense process where I had to face a lot of things that I had done and a lot of attitudes that I had towards people around me. And I had to enter into a process where I bring all those very dark parts of myself and that benevolent force that I told you. I started understanding that it's a spirit and that spirit leads me to the Creator. And I understood that I have to bring these dark parts of myself, these dark actions, these things that I had perpetrated, I had to bring them to the Spirit. And somehow when I did this, it would begin being healed. And as that was healed, I felt forgiveness. And then grace flooded into my being. And for the first time, it felt like my endless quest of seeking the different plans, the different techniques, the different kinds of meditation and consciousness focusing techniques, all of that just lost its weight. It lost its momentum. I needed that less and less because I felt more and more whole within my inner being as I finally let go of these, let's say, these dark aspects of myself. And I finally began finding inner healing. But this was just the beginning of my journey. I still didn't know who this benevolent spirit was. It was just these touches that would come upon me and these tears that would come. So one night I wanted to heal myself from a really, really dark thing that I had. It was during the daytime. I had a vision of Satan with my eyes closed. And at the time, I wasn't operating in any kind of Christian culture. I was fully immersed into the shamanic culture. Even the beings that I was communicating with, they weren't in the Judeo-Christian framework. But somehow I was seeing Satan with my eyes closed. And I'm like, what? Why is this? And I knew this was a bad sign. This was not good. And so at the time, what I knew is that I need to take ayahuasca and mushrooms to heal myself from this, because I knew that these plants carried some kind of healing energy in them. And so that's what I did. I mixed this ayahuasca with mushrooms, which activates them really strongly. And so I took them and I decided I'm going to meditate on this problem and focus on it until I get healed. And so I did that, and it was quite scary because there was a lot of dark forces coming and I could feel a lot of presences in the room that weren't good. There was very dark and damp atmosphere of fear. But I kept focusing. I kept piercing with my consciousness forward, like entering into this meditative state. And at one point, I felt my being go into a corridor. And I could feel this corridor was the corridor into my inner being. So this outward motion was also bringing me deeper in. And all of a sudden, I arrive at this place. And it's almost like I didn't see doors, but I felt they were gates. This secret chamber within my inner being. And I was like, whoa, I've never been to this place. And I felt that I didn't have the access to open it. But all of a sudden, a bright, white, flashing light came. For one split second, a beam of light flooded my entire field of vision. And then, for a split second, I saw Christ open his arms like this. He had his arms open like this. And the moment I gazed upon that vision of the open-armed Christ, in a split second, I received the full healing of that problem. And after that, I felt such a deep sense of peace and an ability to sleep like I hadn't experienced in months. I felt like a little child. I could just finally go to bed and just snuggle in a warm blanket. I hadn't had that for ages. And so that was really powerful. How a split second of gazing at that light of Christ, it did more than years and years and years of ascension techniques and consciousness expanding trance states. It was so interesting. It was almost like I don't have a paradigm to even fit this in. So I attributed it to the plants. Surely it must have been the mushrooms. Okay, so I kept taking more of those for a few months. and I got worse than I was. So that was very interesting. I actually felt lower than I was before. And it was in this very low state that I got, into a quite dark state of being. And I started reflecting upon myself, started concluding that I'm not fit to live in society because I started getting this really strange social awkwardness. I couldn't communicate in a way that was constructive. So I felt that the way that I have to follow is to become a kind of ayahuasca hermit that, goes a lot into the ayahuasca realm, but doesn't necessarily need to involve in the daily life. So that was kind of my solution for this really strange state that I was going through. What happened here is that as I wanted to get more serious about this shamanistic path, because bear in mind that healing that happened when I saw Christ, I attributed it to the plants. So I thought surely I have to continue on this plant path to be able to have more of this, but I didn't have it in the same way. So it happened that night, but afterwards it continued being this murky, strange mixture state that I was talking before. These strange beings would come again and try to take hold of my body. And one night we did a ceremony. We took a high dose of psilocybin mushrooms. Again, what I was doing, I was taking these mushrooms and meditating really deeply. And I could feel that there was like an entity attachment to my body, like a demonic attachment on my spiritual body. So I tried to vibrate at the highest frequency I could and just pop these entities out of me. And that's what I did for a few hours. I was focusing on that state. And all of a sudden, I got a vision of how they all left my body. But what happened is then in the physical world, I opened my eyes and my friend was possessed by a being. I could see a being in this friend of mine. And this friend of mine approached me and did an attack on me, a spiritual attack. So just to give you some context, in the spiritual world, if you get powers, you can use them for benevolence, but you can use them also to attack and defend, because it's also spiritual warfare. There's weapons of warfare in the spiritual world. So what he did at the time was that he used one of these spiritual weapons that he had, but he used it on me. And I was like, what is this? This is really strange. So he put this implant on my chest, and this implant was some kind of mind control mechanism that would tie me to his spiritual system and to serve his operation that he had to fulfill. Kind of, I would be a pawn in his larger scheme. And somehow that would be like a software that would run in the unconscious mind. It was very interesting because what this did was that it broke my trust in every single human. It's really interesting because like from one day to another, I became this very optimistic young guy, this happy guy that's like just very outgoing and expressive. From one day to another, it's almost like I just shut in and I didn't trust any person, no friends, no one around me. I was able to open myself to anymore because of that traumatic event where I was attacked by someone that I trusted. And so that caused this closeness in my being. And eventually I left this man's house and I went back home. And at this state, I was just so confused. Like, where do I go from here? What does my life look like from here? And this was during the quarantine. So COVID had just hit. The world was just in lockdown. And so it was really good because I had a lot of time to reflect. So I had a lot of time to just spend by myself and just think on my life. Like, where am I going? What am I doing with my life? I'm a 23-year-old guy. I'm just finishing uni. Where does it go from now on? I had in my stock a plant, which is a cactus. It's called San Pedro. It was like this very concentrated concussion of it. So I held on to this because I still thought that I needed to follow the shamanistic path. I went to another friend's place, and here I started feeling the callings of Christ. It was a few days earlier that I had read on Facebook that this lady that I met in the trance festivals, it was this lady that I connected with. At the time, we were talking about Alan Watts and Terence McKenna, and we had a really deep conversation about this, and I felt I really connected with her. It's like, wow, this lady, she's a really deep seeker, and she's into all the things that I'm into. But all of a sudden, I saw her Facebook post, and all of a sudden, she's talking about Jesus, how Jesus saved her, how Jesus healed her body, how she had problems that she had accumulated from doing a lot of yoga, and all of a sudden, Jesus healed her body. And I was reading that, and I'm like, what? Like, well, huh? But at the same time, it sparked a memory. I remember a few months back that vision I had of Christ, that light, and then Christ with his arms open. I remember that. So I'm like, there's something interesting here. So let me message her. I messaged her, and she told me about her story, how she was in this rainbow gathering community, and this man came to her, and this man was a follower of Christ, and he prayed for her, and all of a sudden she got set free from all the darkness that she was bound under, and she found freedom. And then she received Christ into her inner being, and she was transformed. She told me this story, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then she said, Joao, I know this sounds strange, but read the New Testament, read the Gospel of John. So at this time, I had nothing else to hang on to. So, okay, why not? So I downloaded a copy of the New Testament onto my Kindle, and that's what I did. I started reading the Gospel of John. So this was all happening simultaneously while I was still thinking I need to follow the shamanistic path. So on one side, I was waiting for the moment where I could finally take the San Pedro to have another experience. On the other hand, I was going through that reading of the New Testament. And so it's almost like there was a split in my being, where I was being pulled and tugged in two directions. And I could feel that, for lack of a better word, a bipolar state, where I'm pulled into one side and then pulled into another. And I'm kind of stuck in this tug of war of these two worlds, of these two rifts. So what happened is, a few days later, surely enough, I did take this San Pedro. I took this mescaline, and I had a really intense experience here. So I was in my friend's house, and then we were outside in nature. All of a sudden, I take this, and the experience begins activating. And I can feel all of a sudden again this disgusting force that tries to oppress me, that I have been fighting for so many years. It just comes again. And all of a sudden, it's almost like I get an X-ray of my inner being. And I see these patches of darkness all over my inner being, like some here, some there. And like these patches of spiritual darkness that isn't filled with light. These were areas which also allowed this outer darkness to affect me. So this plant experience has just started. This was right at the beginning. And I'm like, whoa, this is just the beginning, because San Pedro is a very long experience. It can be up to 10, 15 hours sometimes. And so I'm like, okay, I'm in for a ride. And all of a sudden it starts getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I start feeling worse. So bear in mind, in the beginning of my psychedelic journey, I used to have these beautiful, expansive states of light and life and joy. But here, I couldn't have that. So no matter how much light I tried to generate from my inner being, that the outer circumstances weren't being changed. Like it was continued being this oppressive, dark thing. And all of a sudden, it gets so strong that I close my eyes in the forest, and all of a sudden I get a vision of what seems like a Roman Colosseum. Imagine the Colosseum in Rome, and you're in the middle, and there's all these chairs around you. And so I saw this Colosseum of demons looking at me, and as they were looking at me, they were siphoning life from me. And this was really, really intense. It really concerned me. And so I opened my eyes. I didn't want to look at this vision anymore. And I look at the trees, and then the trees morph into hell, into this hellish realm of distorted, really, this chaotic and really dark place. And I could feel that this realm that I was observing in the morphing of the trees, it's almost I got the message at that time that if I continue the same way that I'm going, that's where I'm headed. And that really shook my inner being up. So I'm like, whoa. And it was that day where I really started deciding, I need to follow Christ. I need to follow Christ, who gave me that beautiful light, that touch of light that in a split second healed my whole being. That benevolence. And let's rewind a bit back. That blanket that I was telling you about, that benevolent blanket, I now started understanding who that was. That was the Spirit of God and the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ. So that Spirit had been visiting me for many months and giving me tastes of His love, of His benevolence, of His grace. And He had been drawing me to Him, so calling me closer to Him. And it was in that day where I had that experience, that really dark experience, that I really understood I have to follow Christ and not shamanism. It was so clear. Finally, I wasn't divided by these two equal opposing forces. I understood, no, actually my life purpose and my life pursuit isn't meant to be dedicated to shamanism and to these psychedelic plants. No, actually I need to pursue Christ with all of my strength, all of my being. And then, so that day I took the decision. And I had this huge migraine from the plant. Like my body was really like sick. And these beings, I could just feel like this residue, this icky residue of these beings. Beyond all of that, I had a tremendous hope because I finally had made the decision that I'm going to follow Christ. And the next day I just wake up determined. This is a day where I'm going to follow Christ. I'm going to dedicate it wholeheartedly to him. And it's interesting, that very same day that I dedicated to follow Christ, I woke up with a spiritual being whacking my back with a stick, and there was no one physically hitting me with a stick. I physically felt hurt by a spiritual being. Some hit me to punish me for leaving that realm that I was a part of. And all of a sudden, these puzzle pieces started clicking, that actually I was part of that realm and I was some kind of agent in that ecosystem. And now that I had been pulled out, that ecosystem was spitting me out and rejecting me violently. And this happened through people, through events, through this stick hitting me on the back, through many really concerning and intense dreams, like really dark dreams, this retaliation. But ultimately, I just started being filled with more and more hope, more and more joy, because I knew, okay, if I'm out of that ecosystem that just spits me out so violently, it means that that's not where I was meant to be anyway. It's not where I belonged. And so that gave me even more joy to follow Christ. And I continued reading this reading of the New Testament. And as I read these pages, these words started coming to life in my consciousness. All of a sudden, I was taken to the cross where Christ was crucified. I was taken to the resurrection where he resurrected. And these realities that I was reading about, it wasn't just a mental knowledge. I was experiencing in my inner being what it was to be, what it was to go through the cross, what it was to resurrect. And so my being started receiving the life of Christ through the words that I was reading and through the encounter with him that I was also having, because I could feel his presence more and more. The nearer I got to him, the more that his presence and his love started approaching me, and I started approaching him also. And I felt the more I did this, that the more hope, the more joy, the more life, the more light, the more clarity started coming in. And so I continued reading the Bible. I continued reading these beautiful words of life that were giving light to my soul and to my spirit. All of a sudden, I got this desire that I need to let go of everything and to just follow Christ. It's been a 3-year-long journey so far where I've been following him, and I've been attentively seeking to hear his voice. And his voice has led me on beautiful adventures out here in the world. You know, I went on a pilgrimage straight away a few weeks after, where I was just walking and learning to hear and commune with Christ and with the Spirit of Christ. Through that communion with Christ, I also was taken to the experience of God as my creator, as my father, as my lover. So I started experiencing all these aspects of God that were absent from my upbringing. I didn't mention this, but when I was a kid, I was raised in Catholicism. And so that's my idea of what the Bible was, of what God was, of what the Christian faith was. It was this box of people going to a church for a few hours and then leaving and not applying anything whatsoever of what they've just learned. And then, maybe being hypocritical and gossiping. But all of a sudden, I started experiencing this God who loved me, this God who was present, this God who healed my being. And all this quest, this journey quest that I was telling you about, of this search for healing, benevolence, life, and light, I started being fulfilled in that. Because whereas before I was searching for the trail of crumbs, all of a sudden I have arrived at the banquet table of it. And I'm like, whoa. And I just continue eating from the life of God, the life and the light of healing that he brings. It was a journey of being healed of many things. I had still many demonic attachments. I still had many entities trying to attack me and take possession of my being. But the closer I got to God, that the more these things left me. And no longer was it this struggle where I had to generate this inner personal strength. All of a sudden, it was the Spirit of God would come upon me and just break these things off me. It would just deliver me and completely set me free from this. And I started experiencing a lot of healing through this, what you call a deliverance. A deliverance is a being set free of these struggles. And it's been a journey, I'll be completely raw and honest with you. I'm still on this journey of healing and growth. I'm still healing from a lot of things that are deep within me. Every day I need to go to that banquet of life and light and healing and eat from the table of God and eat from the table of Christ. But one thing I find is that even though within time I need to do that, I know that within the eternal aspect of my being, that I'm already fully, completely satisfied with the fullness of who he is. And so that also gives me a lot of peace, because although I continue being a spiritual seeker, although I continue on my quest, it's no longer a quest fueled by lack. It's a quest fueled by a sense of deep completion. And it's like my temporal being has to catch up to that. So it's almost like my spirit allows my body and my soul to be temporarily amnesiac of the completion that I actually have already, so that I can find those pieces in the temporal world. Because that means meeting people. That means going to places. That means having a beautiful conversation with someone. Because otherwise I would just sit in my room already fully complete. Because I'm allowed to go through that journey still, I have beautiful experiences where I meet people, I learn a lot of things, and I continue on this journey. And it's been a really profound and beautiful thing to find Christ in such a real, authentic, and honest way. And that's what I want to share with you. Those beginning encounters where I started experiencing the raw power and this raw contrast of what I had been in and what I was in now. Those initial experiences were very strong. But after, it's like a wine that gets matured. You can get a nice wine and it's good. But if you wait 5 years or 10 years, it's even better. So I feel my walk with Christ is like that. It's like a wine that's becoming better and better. So let's say 2 key experiences that have allowed me to taste of this really, really good wine is when I went on a pilgrimage for a month. And so this wasn't like a one-off experience. It was actually an experience of a whole month of being immersed within the presence of God together with people that I love. And so this 1 month allowed me to fully disconnect from all systems, from all worries, from all baggages, from all projections, plans, dreams, and expectations. All of a sudden, that was gone. And for a single month, I was able to be in a spirit-to-spirit connection with God, deepening and being nourished by his being. And so I entered into this state of spiritual communication with the depth of his being, where I began being revealed many deep things about the nature of God, the nature of reality, and my role in also all of this. So that was a month-long experience. A few months later, I also had a really, really, really powerful experience, and that was more immediate. I was at a worship festival, and at the time I was also going through a lot of problems in the physical, not so much spiritual problems. I felt so full of the life of God and like just so filled with joy. But physically I was struggling a bit. And so I decided I'm going to go worship. I'm going to just go. And what is worship? Spending time with God and sending love and adoration and receiving love. And so it's like this beautiful dialogue of joy and communication between you and Creator. And so I was in that state where I was just sending songs and joy and dance. And then I was receiving from him and from heaven just so much grace and love. And all of a sudden I entered into this state where it's almost like I transcended the state of me doing something. So I just entered into spirit. And in that place in the spirit, it's like the veil was torn open and I received a very deep communication of God into my inner being. And that went on for like 10 or 20 minutes. And imagine you're having a conversation with a friend, there's a dialogue going back and forth. And so I was having that with God. There was this communication happening. And as every wave of new communication came from him into my being, I would burst out crying. So everything he said to me brought me into deeper tears. And it was all my being was vibrating and activating all to the very cellular level. It was like I was being truly awakened. Now, I had a lot of experiences with awakening in the past, but this deep awakening was so much more profound because it activated something of a mission in me. It planted a spiritual mission in me and gave me direction as to the purpose of my life. Not the full picture, but the initial platform for me to go forward. So receiving this direction, clarity, and this revelation of the meaning of my life and where I should invest and focus my strength and talents and my dedication into, this was very, very important for me. So not only did it impact me, but it also then produced a long-lasting thread of events and life applications that to this day continue nourishing me and give me a meaning to keep walking forward. So it's to make it really simple for you. I found purpose.
Yeah. Okay. So in beginning to wrap up now, from your heart to the viewers watching who can relate to your story, what would be some final parting words that you would like to share with them?
I would say, when it's all said and done, when we've done all the outward things, we've put on our colorful clothes and done all the outward things that represent this spiritual search, when we really lay aside those outer garments and those outer forms of what it looks to be spiritual, I would say beyond all of that lies a deep, deep, deep fountain of life that's always there. And if you've tasted of that, I want to encourage you to keep tasting of that. And through that, all the outward garments that we put on to make a meaning of what it looks like to be spiritual, to be someone in like a teacher or a master or whatever highest ideal you're striving for, when all of that is laid aside, what remains? And that's a really important question that I feel all of us should ask ourselves. I found that what lies beyond all of that is God. And that God came into this tangible reality to express that in a physical way. For me, my revelation of Christ, of how he is the source that permeates and encapsulates all of reality. So if you are hungry, I really want to encourage you to eat from there, from that stillness, from that place of presence that lies beyond all the layers of reality. At the ultimate layer, beyond all layers, lies Christ. And he has a fountain of life that he's pouring out. And he says, drink. And as we drink, we're filled with the eternal life and light and glory that fills all of us with purpose, meaning, joy, direction, stability. And so I would encourage you, if you're thirsty, approach and drink, because that path has been opened.
Joao, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey with us.
Thank you for having me.